I started the gallery with a generation of artists which were my age, and I think one of our biggest interests was to work on new forms of art which would follow a content and not a practice, so that you, depending on what kind of content one wanted to transmit or to work on, different forms could be applicable. It's also the generation in which we started to work on films being a support at the same title as all other forms of art, and as such recognized. When I started the gallery, there were still big debates about the fact if photography could be considered art. I think I also belong to a generation who founded a commercial economy for all kinds of performing arts. So this is always something which I think the gallery has been very much identified with, and also what I was always the most interested by. We cannot have the work we're having without having also a political position, and a visible political position. I think I always worked with many female artists, not really as a program, but as something I found crucial. I think concessions are principally not a very good idea in no matter what situations. Sometimes it's maybe the better way, pragmatically seen, but by the choice of artists one represents, this should not be. Yes, it's always a bad advice. I think that unless one really want to become a mega enterprise where you have something for everybody, it is extremely important to have a very clear profile. Now, over 30 years, that cannot be the same, because times change, new generation comes, all the encounters happen, but I think that there is something like integrity, which one, if you don't have that, then the quality is also suffering. And I think we are in a very special business, where we need also to be big experts, to have a clear position on what one is doing is extremely important. Of course, we are the dealers, so we are the place. The representation also implies that we are probably the place who makes for an artist the possibility of making a living with the art she or he does. At the same time, we are agents. We are counselors. No, counselor is the wrong name. I think we are, we are advisors. It's many different things at the same time. I think it's a bit like if you're a writer, you have an editor, or as an actor, you have an agent. I mean, at the same time, we're there to help to make an economy, but on the other hand, we're also there to think about the next step, to think about how the work can develop. It's I think a primary gallery is primarily having all these different functions. Yes, that's a big part of our job, is to find the financing or the economy of producing works and exhibitions. It is a complicated issue because it's a loan from the galleries to the artist to enable to produce a work. The rules varies enormously, as it also really depends on what kind of work it is. So it's a challenge, and I can understand that not every colleague always have the possibility to make this happen. I always see us as a partner. Some artists like to work with us on that. Some artists have big studios or want to do this differently. We have accompany artists into every detail of a big institutional exhibition as to think through the financing of it, but also how to, the choice of works and how to present the works, the press around it, or the content. It really depends on the institution, the artist, the opportunity. Fundraising becomes a big part of our work, and it's sometimes very tricky. I think some of my staff has been trained in institution or work, but there's nobody coming from, no kind of chief curator coming from a big institution who came over to the gallery. I think that the work is very different. It sometimes requires similar skills, but we are living from sales, as the artists we are representing are also living from sales. So everything we do at the end has to have a commercial goal, which if somebody has been working a long time in an institution, it might feel or might not be used to think also this way. We did that a lot in the 90s. It's certainly a good way to be careful not to take too many risks. It's not always easy. In the 90s we did that really, it was something a lot of people were doing, like for art fairs, for instance, like it was a very common practice to share a booth and thus to share the sales, and the contacts one made out of an experience like that. The last years also less and less fairs would allow this kind of practice. It might be changing again. It's sometimes very fruitful. Or like the idea of this condo idea, which is also something which was also done in the past, that you have more this exchange, you have a gallery exchanging another one. I think I'm not completely wrong, in the 70s, Yvon Lambert did that with Paula Cooper. I think that was one of the most historical examples of like, how do you share a work base and how you share experience. It's certainly a good way to open relation to new relationships, more than sometimes an art fair even can be. It's again really a question of how much, what is the relationship, what is being asked from the gallery to do for the artist. I mean, for some artists, we're literally doing almost everything. Storage, photography, the entire archive, coordination, tax return, whatever. And some artists have big studios or have small studios that are covering all these works by themselves, and then it's a very different type of split. Or the benefit that one does on sales are very different accordingly. Then it also, in terms of production cost, I mean, very often it's not like 50-50, it's a third, a third, a third. 1/3 production, 1/3 for the artist, 1/3 for the gallery. So I don't think one can really say that there is a general rule for that. It's also really depend, because I understand that you think you're asking this also in regards to younger galleries who are thinking about how to open a business. It's really about having a very, very clear understanding with the artist one represents what this entails, so that the expectations from one side and the other side are not wrong. I think at the end the most important thing is to find an economy, which, because we are working with non-standardized goods, everything we're handling is unique, thus special, thus need special particular attention, and might have to be dealt with in some cases in a very different way. So if a young artist is working with very high production and at the end the returns are not so enormous, it is advisable that one find an economy which at the same time allows the gallery to do the work which is expected and for the artist to be able to make a living from it. So I think the most important thing is to look at the numbers and look at the possibilities and think about what would be the fairest way to deal with it. I think that the 50-50 is more like you share equally. So when the work hardly has production cost, the 50-50 might be a very equal way of splitting the benefit, the turnover one makes. But if the sale entails an enormous amount of other costs, which can be production costs, but can also be that for the work the studio has to travel somewhere, or you need special skilled people to install the work, or you need to have a maid, particularly architecture in an art fair, which always costs an enormous amount of money, then these positions need to be looked at together so that both sides feel that there is a fairness in the deal we're doing together. Yes, sometimes with some artists, it's a lot of work. It has a lot of responsibilities. The work is done, I think it is. Some artists have a huge studio. They have their own archive, they pay their own production, they have their own photographers, they have a personal content team. It's very, in these cases, it doesn't really make sense that the gallery take over also that work and claims 10%. Now, if we are doing this kind of work for an artist and other galleries can benefit of that service, it's clear that we need to get at least something back of the expenses we had to make this possible. It's never have been something which had an urgency. I would say we have thought about having a real office in Asia. We have a representative, but not a place. I thought also about other European countries, Paris, for instance, where I'm from, where it's still like a home base for me. A big part of my family there, and a lot of friends, and also a lot of people in the art world I'm very close to, artists. New York would be an option at some point. It never has been something where I said, okay, this has to be now the next step. Art is something you have to physically encounter. There's a lot one can do digitally, but the experience in itself can virtually, unless they are virtual works, you can virtually only transmit in a kind of, it's more like a sample than a real encounter. So I don't think that virtual galleries can be a solution. No, I didn't say not so much digital. I think that the work of a gallery and the work of presentation and the experience of a work of art cannot always only be done and transmitted digitally. I think a lot of works needs to be experienced live. And that's a very, very important part still of the relationship one has with an artwork, is a physical one. It has been seen as a big progress that universally you could find the same products everywhere. It's also, once it's the case, extremely boring. And I think that especially to go to certain places, to have certain experiences, which you cannot have all over the world the same, is also something which I sense people are looking for more and more. It could very well be that we're getting to, we're facing a moment where more individual, more specialized, more different places, artists, galleries are again what people are looking for. Back in the days, I think that back in the days the position in Berlin within the European art community was different than today. And certainly with a lot of artists moving to Berlin and a lot of Berlin galleries not being coming from Berlin but also have been moved from somewhere else, it seemed that the Berlin galleries were taking over, but you had like galleries from Stockholm moving to Berlin, who were in Art Basel as a Swedish gallery and then became a German gallery, Berlin gallery. You had all the galleries who moved from Cologne to Berlin, who were before Cologne galleries and then Berlin galleries. So if you would look at the geography of the galleries, it was not that suddenly all the Cologne galleries had not been reaccepted and we were accepting a lot of Berlin galleries. It was the shifting of the moving of the galleries from all kinds of places to Berlin, who suddenly made this Berlin presence kind of a natural increase over years without us really doing anything for it. And of course it was really, especially in the early 2000s, a place where the most interesting younger galleries would go and open their spaces. I think that after the fall of the wall and the dissolution of the communist bloc, Berlin was certainly a place which suddenly offered an enormous amount of not only physical space but mental space. Cities, big Western European metropoles were already extremely closed, socially, culturally, but also in terms of spaces. Paris became more a museum city than a city which offered physically the space for younger people to start whatever idea they will have from a future place to make culture. Whereas in Berlin, everything seemed possible. The city has a tragic, horrible recent history, but at the same time, it's also reflecting so much of what the 20th century went through. I think that we are facing two things at the same time. I think that no matter with whom you're talking worldwide, there are places of exceptions, but galleries start to sell less and less directly out of the galleries or out of the exhibitions, which explains also this inflation in art fairs we have. And then, so part of it is, I would say, a more global problem we are facing, and partially it is indeed, even though there are more and more collectors in Berlin, it's certainly not like in New York, for instance. This open, free place where one can, with very little financial means, one can open a space and have a good living. It's true that that's disappearing more and more. It's not only in the art world. I think that in most of the cultural fields, there is very little economy. It is so strange. After 2008, we were a couple of people thinking that it would be the end of the art fairs, and it went completely in the other direction. I think that there have been an enormous amount in the last 10 years, an enormous amount of new markets. And for people who are starting to collect, an art fair is a place where one sense have the better opportunity to make comparisons, to be able to find out if a price is a price, an easier relationship with the galleries, and also geographically, economically, it's you fly here to Miami and you see galleries from the whole world, which otherwise you would have to take the plane to New York, to Chicago, to Los Angeles, to Paris, to London, to Berlin, to Düsseldorf. So it's certainly a much, for the consumer, a much easier way to access to artworks and to have a good overview of it. On the other hand, it's not every artist and not every work is suitable for an art fair. So it's also very limited. But I really think that with the global market and with the extension of all these new markets, more and more clients found fairs a better place to buy art than to have to make their own research worldwide on what the galleries are they want to buy from. It's very difficult. We were talking about that the other day. If we could find a statistic to be able to calculate what would be the non-direct sales which nevertheless have resulted from our art fair presence. But if you really see, if one considers an art fair sale, the sale you have done on the ground while you were there at the fair, and the other sales, I think it is a third, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. I would like to rather look at it in a different way. At every fair we do of this scale, we always meet new clients. It's almost the only place where we really meet in such short time frame so many new people, which partially then really develop later on in sales and or exhibitions. The presence of institutionals are also very important. I wish we would find another format, but I don't have any idea myself what that could be. I'm a traveling saleswoman. It's challenging, yes. That was always a big discussion. Yes, I think the fair needs to have a certain amount of days. It's not always, and also not everywhere, everything is done within the first hours. 5 days is good. It's 1.5 to previous days, and then general public, and then the last days is also to wrap up a lot of business. Very seldomly. It comes on different levels. I mean, if you, for instance, would say, Esther, I think you should really look at this, I would look at it. But if somebody just sent me something without a context or a conversation, we have not the capacity to look at it. At times where I was still sitting on the front desk and regularly artists would come by with a portfolio wanting to show me things, my first question was, do you know what we are doing here? I think it's the most important thing is to start to think in what context my work would fit. And I would say that often it's a better way to start with somebody who's coming from the same context as oneself is, than to think that with a big gallery one has immediately a career. I think that a young artist should first work with a surrounding in which one has started to, in which the work is home.